Hello again. This week we're going to look at tea caddy spoons, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, a couple of weeks ago, and I suppose quite sadly, a lifetime collection of one person came onto the market. Over 400 caddy spoons, and obviously I tried, as many of you will have done, to purchase items from that collection and was successful and bought 3 lots, which was wonderful. The 3 lots I wanted the most. But also, on a sort of sourer note, a week before that I went on social media and pointed out that the most shocking fake of a York caddy spoon was coming up for auction, and warned people, don't touch this with a barge pole, only for the day later for someone to get in touch with me and say, I think I've had a bargain, look at this wonderful cheap York caddy spoon I just bought. So I ummed and ahed for a second and then broke the bad news to them, and I think they were a little disappointed, and I do apologise for that. But happily, I see that it's now turned up again with the same auctioneers, so I'm assuming they took it back and got a refund. Although, after telling the auctioneers the tales, I'm not really sure that they should be offering it again in auction, but that's up to them, isn't it? But it just reminded me that a lot of newer collectors won't possibly be familiar with the fact that when caddy spoons were really very, very collectible about 25, 30 years ago, making big money in London sales, there were people forging them on a sort of semi-industrial basis. So there were lots and lots of fakes about. And you think, well, how on earth has that happened? How can that be commercially viable? Well, funny enough, in the auction I bought an 18th and 19th and 20th century example. I didn't mean to do it that way, but I'm going to show you the 19th century example, and this will explain why those forgeries turned up. Now, this is a really typical 19th century silver caddy spoon. It's just fiddle pattern stem, quite plain, and then a bowl, and often they're round circular bowls, they're shovel shaped or they're shell shaped. This one I purchased because it was made in Newcastle. It was of particular interest because the condition was lovely, it had all its original engraving, and it's by a very rare maker, Clement Gowland the First of Bishop Wearmouth, and he wasn't a silversmith, he was a jeweller and a watchmaker. He never made anything. There were no submissions in the Newcastle Assay Office ledgers for him. But what he did do is he bought work from other Newcastle goldsmiths and then applied his own mark. But he didn't buy a lot, he didn't mark a lot, and he worked for a very short period of time, about 6 or 7 years, overstriking the work of other Newcastle goldsmiths. This is probably Thomas Watson. So really, it's very rare, but it's also quite a common pattern. Now, the problem with these is that it's marked exactly the way a teaspoon is marked on the back. Now, 30 years ago, a teaspoon might have been a fiver, whereas a caddy spoon, particularly an interesting Newcastle or York or an Exeter one, might have been £300 or £400. So the temptation was for people to get hold of teaspoons, particularly damaged teaspoons. They wouldn't even cost a fiver. Simply chop off the stem here, and then solder that fully marked stem onto a bowl, and then say, turn a £5 bit of rubbish into a £200 caddy spoon. The pitfall is, and there are always exceptions, but from London, from Newcastle, from York, from Exeter, from Chester, if you ever see a Chester example, they're almost always one piece of silver. There should be no join here. So if you see a Newcastle or York example, the fake example I saw at coming up at auction had been messed about with terribly. It was the back of a teaspoon had been filed down, the bowl had been added, the bowl was completely new, and then the whole front of it rather cunningly someone had stippled over as some sort of faux decoration to disguise the line or the join at the front, but of course it was still visible at the back. The exception to that rule, and quite a handy exception, are those caddy spoons made in Sheffield and Birmingham. The ones in Sheffield and Birmingham, a lot of them are two-piece ones, even three-piece ones, because some of the Birmingham examples have hollow handles that are stamped out of a back and a front, and then they're applied. The difference is they will usually overlap as a join. So they won't butt up like that with just a line, solder line visible. They will actually physically overlap. And also in Sheffield and in Birmingham, very little domestic flatware was ever made, certainly in the first half of the 19th century. So those teaspoons don't abound for people to chop off and solder onto things. In fact, it could be said that caddy spoons and a few salt spoons were really the only flatware that came out of Birmingham and Sheffield for a number of years, apart, of course, from Sheffield knife and knife handles, which was a big industry as well. So you just have to watch out for that join there. And if you see it, leave it alone. Sometimes they also break here. There are earlier examples, London examples, that are more elaborate and have cast handles. So obviously a cast handle needs to be joined to a cast bowl, and they often bifurcate out or have three sections going on. But again, you've just got to be careful and check that it's a known caddy spoon maker's mark. Beware that these things have been messed about with quite a lot, but that is a lovely period Newcastle example, one piece of silver. As I said, this is inscribed from someone to somebody else. And it was often the habit that if you went and stayed with someone in the 19th century for any period of time, one of the acceptable gifts you might bring along, and also so you didn't use up their supply, might have been a pound of tea. But that would have been not just a pound of tea in a packet. There you go. You would gift it probably within a tea caddy, a little wooden tea caddy, but beautifully decorated, which your host would keep. And if you wanted to push the boat out, you could also include a tea caddy spoon. So you will see a lot of these with gifted inscriptions. Also beware if that's been erased and taken out. That's with all flatware, all engraving, for everything. Just be careful that someone hasn't just rubbed that out and left a dished area. But that was a lovely find. 19th century caddy spoons are what you're going to see most of. When you get into the 20th century, the price of tea and the status of tea has fallen from being a special event or afternoon tea for the wealthy. Everyone has mugs and cups of tea. So caddy spoons fall out of fashion, except in base metals for normal households. They'll still have them, but they'll be in copper. There'll be little novelty ones. You often get them in ceramic as well and in glass. It's only really the sort of cutting edge, wealthier families that still keep commissioning caddy spoons by artisan silversmiths. You'll see a lot by Liberty & Co. Omar Ramsden's very famous in the 20th century, but they do tend to be works of art rather than functional domestic objects. I think even the Keswick School of Industrial Art examples, their basic version was their silver designs, but produced in stainless steel. And you'll all be familiar with those, I think. The one that was in this collection that I was determined to buy, and it was the most expensive of the three caddy spoons I bought, although none of them were devastatingly costly, was this. And funnily enough, this is very Jensen-esque, I think you'll agree, but this is made in Chester. And even though it was catalogued as being 1950s, it does have the Jubilee mark there, may have to do that in close-up, I do apologise. The Jubilee mark of King George V, so it is 1935. And this interested me because it was by a silversmith I had not come across before. I always have an interest in Chester silver, and it's PP in a lozenge. And I think it's in a lozenge because this silversmith, who is female, may have been carrying on the tradition established in London of having a female's maker's mark in a lozenge-shaped punch. It'd be nice if that was the case. And this is Pearl Lewin Page, and she was a known artist and also an exhibiting silversmith. And I have seen one other Caddy spoon by her, but the work is really quite fabulous. All of this is shaped and chased, but also planished. You've got that lovely polished. Planishing is polishing with a hammer, but it leaves all these little facets of hammer marks on it. So as you turn it and rotate it, it catches the light. But what's lovely is this sort of piece here that's been applied to support the stem, the join between the bowl and the stem. That hasn't been planished, so she's really thought about the design of that. Her stuff is exceptionally rare, very fine quality. You will probably never see another piece by her. If you do, well done. And certainly that was something that was a delight to find. But most of the 20th century Caddy spoons you'll find are artisan made ones, so they will be expensive. The Omar Ramsden ones with the little chrysoprase crystals, they can be £2,000 or £3,000. The Liberty ones can run from low hundreds up to high thousands of pounds for the rarer designs, and you've got all sorts of makers in between. H.G. Murphy ones can be certainly £300 to £500, even a little bit more if they've got yellow work on them. But it's all names at this period. Although what a fabulous thing, if you can afford to do it, to collect, because each one is a little work of art. Now, I saved the best one till last, and this was something of a sleeper, and I was a bit terrified it was going to wake up. I was a bit amazed it appeared in the auction catalogued as a London Caddy spoon, but it was. And this is the 18th century example. And this will also show you the difference in style of them. A lot of the 18th century ones, it is Onslow pattern. That has been cast. And then they have these very decorative beaded shell-fluted bowls. Sometimes these bowls, this is hand wrought. Sometimes these can be cast as well, cast as shell bowls. And sometimes these stems can be even more elaborate and cast. And you can see you have a sort of definite join there, but that's because of the style of it. That's a thick wrought handle. And you also have a join here because it's Onslow pattern, a scarf joint, because that part is cast, that stem is wrought, and then it's been joined onto here. It has only two maker's marks on it, IH over IP, which I recognised immediately, as I would. And this is actually possibly, arguably, the rarest York silver Caddy spoon known. And you say, well, how do you know that, Michael? There's a very good book on Caddy spoons by John Norrie, and he also produced some years later this supplement, which I know a lot of you will have. I got it when it was published and was rather envious to see that, which is a page of newly discovered York Caddy spoons of tremendous importance. And yeah, that's that one. That's the one that I've coveted for a good 15 years, and I couldn't believe my eyes. This is, funnily enough, in that supplement, it's dated as 1787, which is wrong. This is the earliest and rarest form of Hampsten and Prince's mark. It's a transposed IHIP with a little mullet in between. I've only seen it on cast sugar tongs before. Really unusual mark, and it dates to the very earliest period. That's why there's no standard mark on this. This is 1776 to 1779, and it is, as far as I'm aware, and certainly as far as the literature goes, the only cast scroll back Onslow pattern York tea caddy spoon known. It was almost the cheapest lot in the sale. It should have been, by some margin, the most expensive. And when I say the market for caddy spoons is slightly depressed, that's quite true. This is happily a well into four-figure piece of silver, and I don't think you'll ever see another one. So I'll hold it up closer to the camera so you get a good look. And that was at auction a couple of weeks ago in a specialist sale full of people collecting caddy spoons, and it didn't wake up. So there is hope, but there are also pitfalls. So just be aware that when you're looking at caddy spoons, you want to check for damage. They do break, they have solder repairs. In that very same auction, there was a very rare early Newcastle cast shell bowl caddy spoon, and I almost got carried away bidding on it until I looked very closely at the pictures and saw that actually the junction between a more elaborate stem than this and the bowl, all these little flutes had been flooded with solder, so it had actually been broken in half and soldered together. There's nothing wrong with buying damaged items as long as you're not paying hugely for them. If you want an example, go and buy a broken one for a few pounds. Lovely way to have an example if you can't afford one otherwise. But just be aware of the numerous fakes. Obviously, the rare provincial assay offices, Exeter, York, Newcastle, that have teaspoons for still 10 or 15 pounds. There's been a huge temptation to turn those into caddy spoons that are worth 200, 300, 400 pounds. So be very wary, and I would almost say that unless you have fabulous pictures, I will give the auctioneers their due, they put fabulous pictures of these things up so you could see them in minute detail. If you can't clearly see the back and the front where the stem joins the bowl, leave them alone. Yes, I've gone on quite a bit, but it's and I haven't even touched the surface. I haven't even scratched the surface of caddy spoons, but it's a really interesting field. It's a collecting field that is coming back, but I promise you 20 or 30 years ago, when money was much more valuable, these things were much more expensive. So if there's a time to start collecting them, it's probably now. That's enough from me, enough waffle. Something else next week. Until then, goodbye and good antiques hunting.